The war came without warning. One moment the skies of Virelia were quiet, the next they burned with red fire. Ships blazed through clouds and the capital's golden towers cracked open like thin glass. The palace guards couldn't hold the enemy at bay, no matter how hard they tried. Screams echoed through crystal streets as the people scattered. Princess Zila watched it all from the high balcony of the royal tower. She was barely 5 feet tall, but her violet eyes burned with fury. She was not like the warriors of her kind. She was born small, weak in frame, and had always been treated as a delicate flower. Suitors from 10 worlds had rejected her, calling her too fragile, too gentle, too unworthy of a throne that ruled 3 sectors. But Zila's heart had something the others didn't see. It beat with fire. Below, her mother the Empress gave the order to retreat. The palace walls were failing, and the enemy, a rogue warband of genetically modified Trigari, was closing, and their leader was a massive brute known as Kor Draga. He had defeated entire fleets, and now he wanted Virelia as his prize. Zila slipped away while no one watched. No one noticed the tiny figure in a dark cloak, escaping through the servant tunnels with nothing but a pulse knife in her anger. She didn't have a plan, only a goal: find help, any help, before her world crumbled. Far away on the outer edge of Virelian space, a human supply ship drifted between the moons. Its name was Echo 7, old and rusty, barely spaceworthy. But inside, a man named Davis Reed was eating cold beans from a tin while fixing a broken gravity stabilizer. He was 6 feet tall, built like a soldier but had the hands of a mechanic. Earth had long left the Galactic Council. Humans were rare now, often treated as myths or monsters. Davis didn't care for politics. He just wanted to be left alone. Until the emergency signal hit his dashboard. He stared at the Virelian distress beacon blinking in the corner of the screen. A royal signal. Ancient encryption. Davis tilted his head. Royalty in trouble? That usually meant traps or demands. Still, something made him pause. Maybe it was the words in the message. This is Princess Zila. My people are dying. If you hear this, please, help us. He cursed under his breath. Then he changed course. Back on the war-torn planet, Zila hid in the ruins of an old temple, her small frame pressed behind cracked stone. Her pulse knife was nearly out of charge. Footsteps echoed nearby. 2 Trigari scouts, bulky and armored, searched the area. She held her breath. Before they spotted her, something hit the ground behind them with a thunderous crash. A shadow moved fast. One Trigari flew backward, armor crushed. The other screamed before a boot slammed into its chest, sending it flying into a pillar. Zila peeked out in shock. There stood Davis, tall, human, covered in dust, and calm as ever. He looked down at her and blinked. You're the princess? She nodded slowly. He laughed. You're smaller than I expected. Her chin rose with pride. And you're bigger than I hoped. The moment was strange. Enemies lay broken around them. Zila held a dead pulse knife. Davis held a giant wrench. And yet in that second, something clicked. Not fear, not weakness. Recognition. Zila didn't know what came next. She didn't know that this man would soon face warlords, argue with emperors, and stand against impossible odds for her sake. She didn't know that her people would laugh at first seeing a human beside her, and she didn't yet realize that strength wasn't in muscle or power, it was in standing when others fell, and Davis Reed had never learned how to fall. Zila had never seen a human before, not outside old videos and dusty history lessons. People spoke of humans as wild, unpredictable, and far too stubborn to live among other species. They were not elegant or graceful. They were not wise or powerful like the Empress's guards. But this human had saved her life with nothing but a wrench and a fearless glare. Davis Reed didn't wait for thanks. He knelt beside the unconscious Trigari and checked for any weapons or signals. His movements were quick, like someone who had done this 100 times before. Zila watched silent, still holding her dead knife in her small hands. Where's your army? Davis asked. I don't have one, she said. He looked up, one eyebrow raised. Then what's your plan? Zila hesitated. She had no plan. She had escaped on instinct. Her planet was falling, her people scattered. She had sent a distress call into the dark and hoped someone would answer. Now a lone human stood before her asking what to do next. I need to reach the old signal tower, she said. It's deep in the wilds. If I can get there, I can broadcast a full planetary distress, not just a royal code. Davis nodded. And let every pirate, scavenger, and bounty hunter know there's a dying princess on a silver world. She frowned. You don't have to help me. Didn't say I wouldn't, he said. I just like to know what I'm walking into. Together, they moved through the ruins. Davis led with quiet steps and Zila followed close behind. The air was heavy with smoke and ash. Distant explosions lit the sky like angry stars. Every now and then, a Trigari patrol passed nearby, forcing them to hide in silence. Zila's heart pounded with fear. Davis's heartbeat never seemed to change. They reached an old transit tunnel, half collapsed but still stable. Davis scanned the walls with a small handheld tool. This was built by humans, he muttered. Centuries ago, Zila said, before we drove your kind away. He smirked. And now you're asking one for help. She looked down, ashamed. You must hate us. Davis didn't answer for a moment. Then he said, I don't hate people. I just don't like being forgotten. The tunnel took them beneath the old gardens, once beautiful with floating lights and whispering trees. Now the plants were wilted, crushed by boots and fire. Statues of past rulers lay broken. Zila walked slower here, each step heavy. Her world was dying, and she could do nothing to stop it. Why did you come? She asked suddenly. You didn't have to. Davis shrugged. Heard a call. Figured someone needed help. That's it? Pretty much. No reward? No favor? He chuckled. I don't think I'd fit in your royal hall. Zila smiled faintly. Neither do I. They climbed out of the tunnel just before nightfall. Ahead stood the mountains, dark and steep. Somewhere beyond them was the signal tower, ancient, dangerous, and guarded by creatures left behind after the last war. No one had used that path in decades, but it was their only chance. Zila looked at the path and felt small. She had always been told she was too weak, too quiet, too soft. But here she stood beside a stranger who had no reason to fight for her, yet did so without question. Davis handed her a spare knife. It was heavier than hers, old but sharp. Know how to use one of these? She held it firmly. No, he smiled. You'll learn. And together, they stepped into the shadows of the mountain, not knowing what waited ahead, but knowing that this unlikely team had already shaken the fate of a dying planet. The wind in the mountains was cold and sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. Zila wrapped her thin cloak tighter, but it did little to stop the chill. The path was rough and broken, full of sharp rocks and twisting trails. Her boots were not made for this. Her people didn't walk far. They flew, they glided, they hovered. But now there was no luxury, only survival. Davis walked ahead, checking for danger. His boots crushed stones, his eyes moved without rest. He walked like a man who had been in worse places. And maybe he had. He didn't speak much, only gave short instructions like, watch your step or stay low. Zila tried to keep up. Her legs ached. Her feet slipped more than once. But she said nothing. She didn't want to seem weak, not to him. As the stars blinked above, they found a small cave hidden behind thick vines. Davis pushed through and checked inside before waving her in. The cave was narrow but dry. He built a small fire using some fuel cells from his pack, keeping it low to avoid attention. Zila sat across from him, her eyes wide in the firelight. You've done this before, she said. More times than I like, Davis replied. Why? Because no one else would. She looked down at her hands. They were small, soft. Not the hands of a fighter, not the hands of a queen. Do you think I can do this? She asked quietly. Davis didn't answer right away. He looked at her closely, then spoke. I think you already are. Silence hung between them, thick and strange. Zila's chest tightened at his words. She had spent her whole life hearing what she wasn't. Too short, too soft, too strange. But this human, who had no reason to care, was the first to tell her otherwise. Suddenly the firelight flickered, a noise outside. A hiss. A thump. Davis stood in a flash, pulling his weapon. Zila reached for her new knife. Her hands trembled, but she held it tight. The cave entrance shifted, and two figures crawled through the shadows. They weren't Trigari. They were mountain beasts, mutated, blind, with sharp claws and long arms. They smelled blood. They moved fast. One lunged. Davis met it midair, slamming it into the wall with his shoulder. He swung his blade hard, driving it deep into the creature's chest. The other beast dashed toward Zila. Her heart stopped, but her body moved. She rolled aside, just like Davis showed her earlier. The creature missed and hit the stone floor. She rose quickly, swung her knife wildly. The blade scratched its skin, but didn't stop it. It roared, spinning toward her, then a boot crashed into its side. Davis again. The second beast fell beside the first, silent now. Zila stood frozen, breathing hard, her knife shaking in her hand. You okay? Davis asked. She nodded slowly. I think so. You moved fast. You taught me. A small smile touched his lips. Then you're a good student. The rest of the night passed without another attack, but the silence was deeper now. Zila couldn't sleep. She stared at the stars through the cracks in the cave ceiling. She thought of the palace, of her mother, of the rejected suitors who had once mocked her, and she thought of this strange, quiet man beside her, who saw something in her no one else had. The next morning, they packed and moved again. The tower was close now, only 2 valleys away. But the enemy had also noticed the old signal paths were active again, and Khor Draga was already sending someone to intercept. Someone who knew Zila. Someone who had once laughed at her in front of all the noble houses. Someone who now wanted her crown for himself. But Zila didn't know that yet. She only knew that her legs hurt, her hands were sore. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she was becoming someone she had never been allowed to be. Strong. The Rasau. Sun rose behind the peaks, casting long shadows across the rocky path. Zila rubbed her eyes and stepped carefully, following Davis as he climbed higher. The tower was near now. She could feel it. The air had changed. It smelled of old energy and forgotten machines. Once we reach the ridge, we'll see it, Davis said. Zila nodded, though her legs were heavy. The climb had taken everything from her, but her spirit didn't break. Not now. Davis stopped suddenly. He knelt and touched the ground. His fingers brushed over a strange mark in the dirt. Tracks, he muttered. Big ones, not beasts. Zila's heart sank. Trigari? Worse, he said. These are boots, military issue. Before she could ask more, a loud voice echoed from above. Well, well, if it isn't the royal runt and her pet monkey. Zila's blood froze. A tall alien figure stepped into view, surrounded by 5 armored soldiers. His armor was dark gold, polished and proud. His sharp smile was even sharper than his twin blades. Drenville, Zila whispered. Dren was a noble from House Grants, a powerful family. He had once courted Zila for her title, not her heart. When she rejected him, he laughed and called her a child with a crown. His insult had spread through all the noble houses. No one dared approach her again. Now he stood before her, armed and smiling. You're far from your palace, little one, Dren said. And dragging trash behind you? Davis didn't speak. He slowly stepped in front of Zila. Dren laughed. Oh, how noble. The human defends the weak, how romantic. Shall I break him first or let you watch? Zila stepped beside Davis. Leave us, Dren. This isn't your fight. It is now, Dren said, raising one blade. You see, the Trigari offered me a fine reward for your capture, and if I bring back your head, Maybe I'll finally get that throne. Davis looked at Zila. Stay behind me. No, she said. I won't hide again. Dren lunged. Davis moved fast. His wrench clashed with Dren's twin blades. Sparks flew. The sound echoed through the rocks. Dren was skilled, trained in palace duels and battlefield dances, but Davis fought like a brawler. He used his whole body, throwing punches, elbows, knees. Each move was raw, brutal, and precise. The soldiers tried to step in, but Zila threw a flash charge from Davis's belt. Light exploded around them, blinding. The guards for seconds, just enough. Davis locked one of Dren's blades under his wrench and twisted. The sword snapped. Dren stumbled back in rage, but Davis didn't stop. He slammed the wrench across Dren's helmet, cracking it open. The noble screamed and fell to one knee. You filthy thing, Dren spat. Davis leaned closer. Say it again. Dren didn't. He collapsed. The soldiers, now clear-eyed, saw their leader beaten and dropped their weapons. Zila stepped forward. Her voice was clear and calm. Return to your masters. Tell them the princess is not alone. The soldiers hesitated, then ran. Zila turned to Davis. His face was bruised, blood on his cheek, but his eyes still burned. You didn't kill him, she said. No need. Pain lasts longer. Zila stared at the man who had just defeated a royal warrior with nothing but a wrench and grit. I used to think strength was in titles, she whispered, but now I see it's something else. They reached the ridge just as the sun climbed higher. Below them stood the old signal tower, tall, broken, but still breathing. A soft light blinked near its top. The signal corps. Davis exhaled. We're close. Zila nodded. And we're not turning back. She looked at the tower, then at him. You've already changed my fate, she said. Now let's change my people's. The signal tower rose like a dying tree from the mountain's spine. Its sides were rusted, vines crawling up the once smooth surface. Birds circled above its broken antenna, and winds howled through shattered metal beams. But the core still pulsed faintly like a heartbeat waiting to wake. Zila stared at it in silence. She had seen it once in a history scroll, built before the royal fleet even existed. No one used it anymore. It was old tech, too risky, too exposed. But now it was their last hope. Davis scanned the structure with a tool. Stability's weak. If we climb wrong, it might break. We have no choice, Zila said. If I send the full distress call, maybe someone still loyal will come. Maybe, Davis replied. Or maybe more enemies show up first. She looked at him. You're still coming with me? He gave a short smile. All the way. They entered the base through a broken hatch. Inside, the tower creaked and groaned with every step. Old lights flickered as they passed, casting long shadows on the cracked floor. Zila felt every sound in her bones. At the center of the tower was the lift. Dead, rusted, useless. We climb, Davis said, pointing to the emergency ladder running up the inner shaft. Zila stared upward. The climb was long and high. Her hands were already sore, but she nodded. Davis let her go first. Step by step, she pulled herself upward. The metal was cold and rough against her fingers. She didn't look down. She couldn't. The air thinned as they rose. Davis climbed silently behind her, watching her every move, ready to catch her if she slipped. Halfway up, the ladder shook. Zila stopped. A deep growl echoed from below. She looked down. Something was crawling into the tower. Huge, armored, not Trigari, a war beast. The Trigari had released it into the mountains years ago, a hybrid built for siege warfare. It had one purpose: destroy anything that sent signals. It's climbing after us, Davis said. Fast. We'll never reach the top in time, Zila gasped. He glanced around. There's a side platform. I'll distract it. You keep going. No, she said. You'll die. He gave her a look. Calm, steady. Better one of us makes it. Before she could argue, he dropped down to the platform and pulled out his last plasma charge. Hey, ugly, he shouted. The beast roared and turned toward him. Davis hurled the charge straight at its face. Light exploded. The creature roared and swung wildly, smashing pipes and beams. The tower shook violently. Zila screamed his name, but he was already gone in the smoke. Tears burned her eyes, but she didn't stop. She climbed faster. Her hands bled. Her arms burned. But she reached the top. The signal core waited. Silent. Waiting. She slammed her hand on the console. Royal Code Alpha 7, she said. Princess Zila of Virelia. I call for aid. Nothing happened. She screamed. Please! Then the core glowed. Bright blue. Signal sent. She dropped to her knees, sobbing. Minutes passed before she heard movement below. She turned, heart frozen. Davis climbed through the smoke, covered in dust, one arm bleeding, limping. You're alive, she whispered. He grinned. Told you I don't fall easy. She ran to him and held him tightly. He didn't pull away. The tower shook one last time but held steady. Above them, a distant light blinked in the sky. 1, then 2, then a dozen. Ships. Not enemy ones. Allies. Coming home. Zila looked at Davis with tears in her eyes. You saved my world, she said. No, he replied. You did. The Allied ships broke through, the clouds like silver comets. Zila watched them in silence, her hand resting on Davis's arm as they stood atop the ancient tower. They had done it. The call had been answered, but the war was far from over. Dropships landed quickly in the valley below. Soldiers in clean armor marched out, their banners high and royal crests shining. Some bore the symbol of her mother, the Empress. Others wore the colors of lesser houses, old allies who had gone silent when the invasion began. A tall woman stepped forward, her hair silver, her presence cold. Commander Rena of House Dre, Zila whispered. My mother's war advisor. The BAE. Commander looked up at the tower, then motioned for her soldiers to wait. Zila turned to Davis. They came because of the signal, but they didn't expect you. Davis cleaned his bruised knuckles with a cloth. That's fine, I'm not here to impress them. She touched his shoulder. Maybe not, but you've already changed the story they'll tell. They descended, the tower slowly. Zila walked without stumbling. Davis limped from the earlier fight but still moved with quiet power. When they reached the bottom, the soldiers raised their weapons, but Commander Rena held up a hand. Stand down, her voice was sharp as ever. Zila stepped forward. You came, she said. Your signal was unexpected, Rena replied. We believed the capital had fallen. We received no orders. You receive one now, Zila said firmly. Rena raised an eyebrow. You speak with authority. I am the last voice of Virelia still standing, Zila said. And I will not kneel in fear while my people suffer. There was silence. Then Rena spoke again, eyes narrowing at Davis. And this one? A human? Your guard? He is the reason I stand here, Zila said. He is the reason the tower still stands, and the reason this war has not been lost. A murmur passed through the ranks. Unusual company for royalty, Rena muttered. Zila stepped closer. You judged me once for being small, for not fitting the shape you expected of a ruler. But size does not define a leader. She glanced at Davis. Strength is in action, in heart, in sacrifice. Rena looked at the battered human, then at the proud but worn princess before her, and for the first time she bowed slightly. As you command, princess. Zila exhaled. The soldiers followed suit. One by one they lowered their weapons and bowed. Davis shifted awkwardly. Is this normal? Zila smiled. It will be. The soldiers secured the area. Medics treated Davis's injuries while engineers restored power to the tower. Zila walked among her people, not as a fragile symbol, but as a survivor, a leader, a voice they had almost forgotten. Later that night under the stars, Zila and Davis sat on a cliff edge overlooking the valley. Fires burned gently below, signaling the start of camp. Ships still hovered, waiting for orders. Zila leaned against him. "They'll want to bring me back to the palace." "You should go," Davis said. "Your people need you." "And what about you?" He didn't answer. "I don't want to be a symbol anymore," she whispered. "I want to build something, a future, a world that listens to the ones it used to ignore, the small, the strange, and the stubborn." Davis looked at her with quiet respect. "Sounds like a hard path? Then I'll need someone who doesn't fall easy." He smiled. "Guess I'm already hired." She took his hand, small fingers wrapping around his scarred palm. "No one wanted me before," she said softly, "but I wasn't weak. I just hadn't met the one who could see me." And as the night deepened over Varelia, a new chapter began, not just for the princess or the planet, but for the galaxy that had forgotten what true strength looked like. Sometimes it came in 6 feet of dirt-streaked human, and sometimes in a 5-foot heart that refused to break. The palace gates opened wide, but the halls felt colder than before. Zila walked through the grand corridors in silence, her royal cloak restored, but her crown still absent. Davis walked beside her, his eyes scanning everything. The guards stared. The nobles whispered. Some looked shocked, others looked disgusted. A human in the royal court? Unthinkable. But none dared speak openly. Not yet. They entered the throne hall. At the far end sat the Empress, Zila's mother, alive, unharmed, and untouched by the war that had shattered the outer cities. Her long robes glittered with stars embroidered in gold. Her face was calm but unreadable. Zila stepped forward and knelt. "Mother," she said, "I've returned." The Empress studied her for a long time. Then her eyes flicked toward Davis. "This is the human?" Zila stood straight. "He saved my life, saved the tower, held the line when others fled." "And what reward do you seek, human?" the Empress asked coldly. Davis folded his arms. "Didn't come for rewards. I answered a call." "A call from a girl no one believed could rule," the Empress said, eyes narrowing. "Yet she stands here now." Zila's jaw tightened. "Not because of you, because I chose to fight, and because he stood beside me." The Empress rose from the throne. She walked slowly down the steps, her long dress trailing behind her. "You shamed this court once," she said softly, "when you rejected the suitors of power." "I didn't want power without purpose," Zila replied. "And now, I want a future where strength means more than bloodlines." The Empress paused before Davis. She studied him like a strange weapon. "You would defend her with your life?" "I already did," Davis said. "And if you were asked to leave?" He didn't flinch. "I'd only go if she asked." There was silence. Then the Empress gave a short nod. "Then let the court witness," she declared, her voice echoing, "that the princess has returned not as a child but as a flame that refused to die." Zila blinked. She wasn't sure if it was praise or warning. Nobles bowed. Some slowly, some reluctantly, but not all. A group near the back remained still. Hausgrans, the same house Dren belonged to. Later that night, in Zila's private chambers, Davis stood near the window looking out at the glowing city. Zila removed her heavy cloak and sat on the edge of her bed, her thoughts heavy. "They won't stop," she said. "Hausgrans, the Trigari, maybe others." "I know," Davis replied. "They'll say I've broken tradition, that I brought shame. They're afraid of what you've proven." Zila looked up. "And what's that?" "That a princess doesn't need saving," he said. "She just needs someone to walk beside her." She smiled, a small, tired smile. "Then stay close. Tomorrow, I speak before the council." "They'll listen," Davis said. "No, they won't," she replied. "Not at first, but I'm done begging to be heard. I'll show them why I deserve to be. He walked over and knelt before her, not out of duty, but out of quiet respect. I've fought wars, Davis said, faced monsters. I've seen planets fall. But I've never seen anything more dangerous than a woman who refuses to stay quiet. She laughed softly and touched his cheek. Good, because we're not done yet. But outside the palace walls, deep in the shadows of the city, House Granz prepared something dark, something final. They hadn't forgotten the insult Zila delivered by surviving. And they wouldn't let a human change the future of the royal bloodline. They were about to test everything she had built. And this time, they weren't coming with blades. They were coming with betrayal. The council chamber buzzed with quiet tension. Leaders from every house sat in tall chairs carved from crystal, watching Zila with cold eyes. Some nodded with respect. Others only stared. The Empress sat in the center, her face unreadable. Zila stood alone in the center floor. No crown on her head, no army at her back. Only truth. I called for aid when no one listened, she said, voice clear. I stood in fire when others ran. I saw my world breaking, and I chose to rise, not hide. Murmurs echoed. You call me small, unfit. But strength does not scream. It endures. And in the end, it changes everything. The nobles shifted. House Granz remained still. Lord, Marin Granz stood up slowly. His voice was soft, like a whisper hiding a knife. Words are easy, he said, but power is shown in blood and legacy. This Night Princess ran with a human, trusted a beast of another world. That is not leadership. That is failure. Davis stood at the side, fists clenched. Zila didn't flinch. I trusted the one who acted when no one else did, she said. A man with no title, no favor, just courage. And that is the legacy I choose to build. Granz smiled. Then you defy tradition. And the law. He raised his hand. Suddenly, soldiers of House Granz stormed the hall, weapons drawn. Gasps rang out. The Empress stood quickly, shouting for order. But Zila raised her hand, and her voice. No more silence. Her voice rang through the hall, like thunder. The doors behind burst open. Dozens of warriors flooded in. Soldiers loyal to Zila, survivors from the ruined cities, and citizens who had heard her signal and followed the call. And at their front, walking tall, stood Davis, armor-scarred, wrench at his side, and eyes locked on Granz. You wanted a throne built on fear, Zila said, walking slowly toward Granz. I'll build one from hope. Granz's soldiers froze, surrounded. Davis walked past Zila, calmly stepping up to Granz. Want to try me again? He asked. Granz's face twisted. He turned to run, but was met by Zila's blade, pointed directly at his chest. No more running, she said. The Empress raised her voice. House Granz has broken sacred law. Their name is stripped. Their power ends here. The chamber erupted. But Zila did not shout in victory. She turned to the council. I do not claim the throne for power, she said. But if you will have me, I will lead, not as a shadow of those before me, but as myself. Silence. Then one by one the nobles stood and bowed. And the Empress? She walked forward. Her hands gently placed a small silver crown on Zila's head. My daughter, she whispered. You have done what I could not. That night the palace celebrated. Fires burned in honor, not in war. Songs returned to the city streets. And the name Zila was no longer followed by laughter, but by pride. Davis stood at the balcony watching the lights below. Zila stepped beside him. They wanted a queen, she said. But they got a storm. He looked at her with a smile. They also got a mechanic with a wrench. She laughed and leaned her head on his arm. They'll never understand how much you did. Don't need them to. I do, she whispered. Because you didn't just save my world. She looked up at him, her violet eyes glowing under the stars. You gave me the strength to believe I could rule it. He kissed her forehead, and in that moment, the galaxy shifted. Not because of war, not because of bloodlines, but because a tiny alien princess and a 6-foot human chose each other and built something no empire ever could: hope.